Hello, my friends. It is March. It is Child Life Month, and I am Katie Taylor, a certified child life specialist. I can't think of a better way to celebrate Child Life Month than to sharing the backbone of Child Life on Call, and that is Lyndsey. If you have been here for the past 7 years, then you have heard her episode on the podcast where we originally introduced her. And she had a parent story about one of her kiddos. Fast forward into where we are now in 2024. She has had another child, actually 2 more. So she has a total of 4 kids and another one who is medically complex. And so I had the great honor of interviewing my friend, my companion, my partner in building Child Life on Call. And we will be talking about her son, James, today. So I'm so glad that you're here, and I can't wait to let you listen to Lyndsey's perspective of what it's like to have a child with chronic kidney disease and being born with it and what their NICU experience was like. We are going to have to do this episode in 2 parts. So consider this part 1. And this is from their experience in utero all the way up to transplant. And so yeah, enjoy Lyndsey, and I hope that you take away so much of the goodness and the perspective that she offers as such a important voice for kidney parents, but also for child life specialists. Happy Child Life Month, my friends. I am so happy and excited to be with you. It is the first week of Child Life Month, which is the month of March. And traditionally, if you're a child life specialist, we spend the whole month making sure that others know what our job is. But here at Child Life on Call, we want you to know how grateful we are that you show up to work every day. Parents, that you ask questions with this child life community, that you find benefits from the tips and suggestions that we put out there on social media. So this is just a big hug from me here at Child Life on Call to you to say Happy Child Life Month. And we wanted to give back to all of you who listen to the Child Life on Call podcast. We know you're child life specialists, parents, and child life students. So I'm so excited to tell you that if you are a child life specialist who has been wanting to join the Child Life Circle, you have been wanting to find a place online where you can connect with other child life specialists, get PDUs that are not crazy expensive, get access to virtual clinical supervision, you can do all of that for just $19.99 a month. I know it sounds very inexpensive, too good to be true, but I promise it is not. Actually, just during the month of March, sign up with no strings attached for free for 7 days. Come try out the circle, see what you think. We would love to meet you there. Parents, we haven't forgot about you either. Last year, we launched our How to Prepare, Support, and Respond to Your Child During SHOTS course. The feedback we got from parents was incredible. They felt empowered. They initially had tools as soon as they left the course to go support their child and advocate for them. And we want you to have that course. We are having it available during the month of March for 50% off. So if you go to childlifeoncall.com/shots, and when you type in the coupon code March, 50% off, no questions asked, but make sure you get it because this deal and this course will not last forever. And lastly, child life students, if you're listening, we have partnered with some of the best mentors in the field, your child life coach, your child life guide, AJ and Lauren. And if you come get a child life student service through us and you type in the coupon code March, then you get 10% off any of your services this month. So come join us. We would love to have you there. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and/or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here.
Yes.
We're finally here.
I know. This has been, I feel like, years in the making, kind of a funny but not so funny joke. I think that we have booked and rescheduled this podcast probably 4 or 5 times because every time I booked or had to reschedule, James has either like had to go to the emergency room or he's been admitted. And so now we're kind of in a different stage of post kidney transplant life, and things are a lot different. And life is
Yeah,
just completely different now. And things are going a lot more smoother than they were. We'll just put it that way.
for sure. I feel like the recordings that we ended up not being able to do, and it would come down to like literally the wire, like the day of
Mm-hmm.
you would get admitted or something would happen. But it wasn't like the right time. And now I know you're not out of the woods yet. You really never are with a kid
No.
who's post transplant, but you're settled. You're all at home under one roof. And that wasn't the case for 6 months.
Yeah, no, it was quite a journey to get to where we are today. But, I feel like my saying is like everything's okay until it's not. And,
Yeah.
having a medically complex child, it's like everything's fine. And then, we have a morning where we've thrown up a lot or our blood pressure's too low and he just doesn't look good. And so you just never know what you're going to get. It's kind of like a grab bag every day
Yeah.
being on dialysis. But now that we're not on dialysis anymore, I feel like life is a lot more calm.
I know. I feel like we have to catch people up to speed a little bit from the first time you were on the podcast. And what number episode were you? Do you remember?
I want to say it was either 17 or 18. I don't remember which one.
Really early in the
Really
beginning
early.
of like it must have been 2018. And I'm trying it like we've worked together for so long now that it's hard for me to remember back then. But you were a mom on the podcast sharing about your daughter,
Hmm.
Vivian, and her cochlear implants and what that experience was like for you all. And then lo and behold, I can't remember if I called up to this really fancy preschool next to me or if I walked in and saw you, but my daughter ended up going to the preschool that you were the director at.
Yes. No, I think you actually may have DM'd me on Instagram or something asking if we had any availability. And then you came in for a
Okay.
tour. And I'm
Yes.
pretty sure that's maybe what happened. But yes, that is
Okay.
how we got connected again, was through the preschool. So yeah, just one thing led to another. And here we are today.
And here we are today. And you are the backbone of Child Life on Call, keeping us all together, keeping my head on straight, keeping your head on straight, keeping us moving forward,
Mhm.
always jumping into new tasks, always saying, like, how can we get this done? And it's no surprise that you have so many skills, not only from your previous career as a director of a very incredible, it's more than a preschool, it's an early,
Mhm.
childhood development center. And you're also a mom of a kid with a lot of medical complexities. And so, for our listeners who listened to your episode many years ago, will you just get us up to speed on Vivi and how she's doing?
Yeah, no, Vivian is thriving. When I recorded back then, I think she had just been like maybe less than a year post getting her cochlear implants. She ended up graduating out of like her auditory verbal therapy and her speech therapy. I want to say between 4 and 5, which I was really sad because I miss seeing Miss Amy. So, Amy, if you're listening to this, Vivian is begging to come see you. She loves her Miss Amy. And so, Amy is our auditory verbal therapist, and we love her, adore her. So that was a little bit sad. It was kind of like quote unquote a breakup in a way, because it was a part of our routine and she still is a big part of our lives. But Vivian is doing absolutely phenomenal in school. She loves to read. We did have a little bit of I feel like first and second grade, they do a lot of reading. I remember back to
Yeah.
like when I was in elementary school, and I feel like the expectations weren't as high as they are now. But she loves to read, and she's the happiest child, and she's just doing absolutely wonderful.
Hmm. And Lyndsey and I work from home. So often we get to see each other's kids pop in and out. And it's like one of the
Yeah.
most fun parts of working remote, but like seeing each other every day. And so I constantly get to see whether it's Vivi, and then one day Jason even popped his head in and
Oh
I got
yeah,
to see
Jason
him
loves
and I
to
see
say hi.
Lily.
Oh yeah,
And then
Lily
the
on it all the
absolute
time.
Lily wants to come hang out with us. And then
Mhm.
Jamesy, who we're going to talk about today, who is like just the sparkle of everyone's eyes, the sweetest buddy.
Mhm.
Walk us through getting pregnant with James and all that you went through even before he was born.
Yeah, no, it was a really busy time. I mean, it was like in the end of COVID. So, well, not really the end, really kind of in the middle. So, it was like the end of 2020. We had found out we were pregnant. We were actually in the process of buying a new home. And so we closed on our home. It was about 3 years ago, I guess, almost to the day. We closed on our new home. And then we announced to the world that we are expecting baby number 4. And I need to go back and say that Liliana was born in between Vivian
Between
and
them.
James. So that was in 2019, just before COVID hit. And so we were very excited to be in our new home. We had went, to the 19-week ultrasound where they check everything out, heart, lungs, kidneys, like you name it, do everything. And so we went to the ultrasound. They were kind of quiet, I feel like during the end of the scan. And then they took a long time to come back. And I feel like I hear so many moms say this, and you kind of like know, especially if you're a seasoned mom and you've had several of these scans before in the past. And they came back and they were like, James's kidneys seem like they're dilated, which is not an uncommon finding. That's probably one of the most common findings we see in boys, as far as like maybe like a defect, or something that's just not quite where it should be, if that makes sense. And so they were like, let's have you come back in 2 weeks. She was like, Dr. DeStefano is her name. She's really great here in Austin. She was like, you know what? Let's have you come back in 2 weeks. We'll do another scan, check on things. And things were kind of still the same. And she's like, I'm not, quite yet worried. I mean, his kidneys were just dilated at that point. They didn't really see a whole lot with his bladder. And then we went back for another appointment, and everything, actually, his kidneys had looked better. And they were very happy. They were like, oh, this is great. And then I go back the next week. And of course, I'm by myself because things had been better. And Alex was like, oh, I'll just skip out on this one. And I was like, yeah, no, I think everything will be fine. And so I was by myself. And I remember they were scanning me, and they just had kind of puzzled looks on their face. And I was kind of looking at the ultrasound, and I was seeing what they could see. And then they're like, we'll be right back. We need to go get the doctor. And of course, again, like it's like the longest. It was only like probably 10, 15 minutes.
That's a
But
long time, though, to be sitting exposed on a table alone. And like,
yes.
you never know really, like, can I look at my phone? Can I go grab this? Can I sit up? Like
Oh,
some of these like really
totally.
weird things, you don't even know what to do. You feel paralyzed.
Yeah. And then in the middle of it, it's like COVID, right? So like everybody, we're all in masks, trying to keep social distance, all of that. And so then the doctor comes back in, and she's like, I'm really sorry. Like, I don't think I have the best news for you, but she was like, I'm going to need to refer you out to a fetal care specialist. On the ultrasound today, well, what they thought it was at first is that he had polycystic kidney disease, where there's like different cysts that grow on the kidneys. But it ended up being that it wasn't that, it was his ureters. And so a little kidney urology, nephrology lesson here is you have your kidneys and then your ureters, and your ureters hook up to your bladder. And so what had happened over that span of 2 weeks is that he urine refluxed into his kidneys, shrunk them down, and then also in the process destroyed his ureters and like made his bladder like really big. And so we went to that appointment with a fetal care specialist, and they were absolutely amazing. A husband and wife team, which is
Wow.
incredible. He is a doctor, a maternal fetal medicine doctor, and she was like the nurse navigator, kind of just like walking us through everything. And so we went in for that ultrasound, and it was really long. It was probably like about an hour and a half where they scanned and had me go into different positions. The sonographer stopped. She actually had him come in and do some scans. And at that point we were expecting to not get great news, just based off of like the length of the scans and how all of that was going. And then they brought us into the room, and we were bracing for it, but he let us know that he felt that James had a condition called post-urethral valves. And that's where it is a condition that happens and a piece of skin grows over the urethra. And so what happened is he was not able to pee in utero. And so in addition to that, like my amniotic fluid was also getting lower and lower, which can be very dangerous for him. And so he was like, I don't have the best news to give you. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. He's like, I wish I could just look into a crystal ball and tell you that everything was going to be okay, but I can't. And, he talked to us about he's probably going to need dialysis if he makes it. And he did a great job of drawing everything out and just explaining to us. And of course, when, he left the room, we both started crying. It was a very emotional time. And Karen was so good to us. She was the fetal nurse navigator, and she just came and sat with us and really was very comforting. And at that point, they were like, you're going to have to start coming in for weekly scans. But in the meantime, we want to see if he is a candidate for a fetal surgery that would essentially put a shunt in to drain his bladder, or he could be a candidate for amnio infusions. And that's where they essentially go in and they put a needle into the womb and they inject it with saline so the baby can have amniotic fluid so the baby's lungs can develop, because that's a really big concern of kids that have this condition, is that they have underdeveloped lungs. They just have lots of breathing difficulties because they don't have the amniotic fluid. And they also don't have a lot of swallowing practice. So as you can imagine, they don't have any amniotic fluid, they can't swallow. There's a couple different things that kind of end up being a big deal that don't really seem like a big deal to people out there. So we went and met with a urologist, we met with a nephrologist, and they were both like, we don't think you're a candidate for amnio infusions or a shunt, just based off of the fact that he's not really urinate. Everything is the damage has already been done at this point. It happens so quickly. Whereas sometimes this, it kind of gradually over time, but it just happened with him really quickly. And so there really wasn't much that they could do as far as interventions at that point. And then we started going to weekly appointments where they would, scan, they look at his heart, look at his lungs. It was really cool. We could actually see him practicing swallowing, which was reassuring. We could see his lungs develop. And so we were going weekly for those appointments. And then I also would get hooked up to make sure I wasn't having any contractions and, the fetal monitoring, and everything always was great with those. And the game plan was that he was actually supposed to be the first baby born here locally in Austin at the new fetal care center at Dell. But James had plans of his own. He was supposed to be a scheduled C-section. So knowing James, this is pretty par for the course. But it was one of the first curveballs he kind of threw at everybody.
It's so interesting. This piece of skin causes so much trouble,
It's
right? And so
destructive, is what I call it.
yeah, it is a destructive little piece of skin.
Mhm.
And so when his urine was going back up, did it essentially just burst through his ureters, and broke them? Or
Well, what
is
it
that
did
what
is it
happened?
essentially, yes. So what happened was it enlarged his bladder. And then the urine it kept reflexing into the kidneys so badly that it just made them get enlarged because there was so much urine backed up
Right.
into his ureters and then into his kidneys. And so they could see it on the ultrasound. What happened was that his kidneys just were shriveling every week.
Mm.
And it's a fine balance, right? Of okay, well then do we schedule an early C-section to try to save his life, or do we let him continue to grow and hopefully develop his lungs more? So it's really one of those catch-22s of where you're kind of having to make decisions based off of little information. And this is the hard part about all of this too, is there's not that many studies, there's not enough information about children this young with this condition. It's still fairly quote unquote new, but it's just
Mm.
becoming more prevalent, I feel like. But I also am one of those people that when I start seeing something, of course, that's going on with you, right? You see it in more people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So James's curveball, right? You had your planned C-section, and what did he
uh-huh.
decide?
So coincidentally enough, well, it was 2 weeks before the scheduled C-section. I was 35 weeks and 6 days. And the day prior, I had gone to my appointment and I wasn't having any contractions. James looked good. Everything looked great. And my in-laws were going to a triple funeral in Minnesota for family members, unfortunately, that passed of COVID. So they were flying out that Friday morning on June 25th. And then my sister and my sister-in-laws well, almost all of them except for Rebecca.
And there
Uh,
are a lot of you.
yeah, there is a lot. My husband's the oldest of 6 and I'm the
Yeah.
oldest of 3. So we have a really big family. And so my cousin was getting married. So they all headed off on a plane to Minnesota too, to go to a bachelorette party. And so the night before, I was kind of having some contractions and my sister was like, I got flight protection. I can just cancel the flight. Like, she's like, are you sure you're not going into labor? And I was like, no, 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 no. Like, that's not happening.
How many weeks were you?
I was 35 weeks. So I wasn't
Okay.
too early, but I'd also been having contractions basically from like 27 to 28 weeks because I
Okay.
didn't have very much amniotic fluid and he didn't have
Okay.
much room. And so I was having like lots of like pains and contractions. And they were like, that's kind of like normal to feel this when you don't have that much cushion left. Right.
Right.
I just thought it was that. And so then the next morning comes, everybody, gets on their flights and leaves. I arrived to work very early because on that morning I have an earlier shift and I have all 3 of my kiddos with me. I get to the school and also I have one of my coworkers was on vacation and my boss was also in another country on vacation at the time. So it was me and my friend Deshauna. So if you're listening to this, Deshauna, thank you for forcing me to go to the doctor. And I tell her this frequently, like she's very instrumental because I was being very like hard-headed about it. So I get to the
Yeah.
school, la da da da, going about my day, and I'm like starting to have these contractions again, and they're like 10 minutes apart. So I call the doctor, and they're like, "Well, let's just have you time them for like the next hour, and if you're still having them, let's just have you come in, and we'll get you checked out." And I'm like, "Sure, fine, that sounds great." And they're still happening, and then I call back. They're like, "Yeah, we need you to come in." And Tashana's like, you need to go. Like, just go. You need to go take care of yourself. Like, just go get checked out. Peace of mind. She's like, I'm fine. I've got it. And I felt like I knew in that moment that it was going to happen because I went to all 3 of my kids' classrooms and I gave them a hug and a kiss. And I just like, I had this mom gut instinct
Mhm.
that it was going to happen or something was going on. Something was not right. So I get in my car and get onto 290 driving down the road and I calling my in-laws, of course I called Alex, right? He knows what's going
Yeah.
on, trying to keep everybody updated. And then, he's like, do I leave work? And I was like, I think I'm fine. And then I was like, just stay on the phone with me, while I'm driving. And
Yeah.
so I'm going down 290 and my contractions are like 8 minutes apart. And then I got onto Mopac and they're like 6 minutes apart. And then at that point, I'm like, you need to probably leave. Like, I think I'm going to have him like today. And he was like, okay, well, let me just talk to my boss. And I was like, okay, like, bye. And then I get onto 38th Street, which is going into downtown Austin, and they're 4 minutes apart. And I'm like, oh no, like this is like seriously happening. So I call him
Wow.
back and I was like, you need to leave work right now. Like, I'm going to have this baby probably in the next hour and a half to 2 hours. And he's like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm going. So he, leaves work. He's driving as fast as he can to get there. I get into the hospital. I'm like kind of like in like this denial mode and I'm trying to find a parking spot. I should have just
Oh my
parked in
God.
the ER parking thing. But I was also
Yeah.
like, I had a new minivan. I was like, I don't want anyone to come steal my new ride. It's kind of funny, but
I did not know this part of the
not funny.
story. It's
Yes, no,
cracking
people
me
harass
up.
me about it all the time, and a lot of people don't know this story, so this is gonna be really fun because I've been waiting
Yeah.
to just share it like this in the podcast. And so, it's COVID, they have things set up a little bit differently. I walk into the emergency room and they were like, "Ma'am, you can take a seat right over there." And I was like, "No, I'm not taking a
Mm-mm.
seat." I was like, "I'm in active labor and I need to go to labor and delivery." And I had never been to this hospital before, and so I found my way up there. And I got in and I felt like it was taking forever during the check-in process. Of course, so you have your ID,
Of
your insurance
course.
card.
I love that. And you're like in active labor and pain, and you're like, here's my ID. Hold on.
Yes,
Let me get
that's
let
basically
this
it. I
one
was
go
like,
by.
and then I get in there and they were like, they were so great. They were like, we've already called, both of your doctors and they're actually in a fetal surgery right now. And I'm like, oh, cool. And then, they check me and they're like, you're dilated to 8 centimeters. And I'm like, what? And then, of course, I'm like, and then I have a whole flurry of people in this small triage room. There's probably like 10 people in there making sure they're like, ultrasound. We have him, monitoring hooked up. Somebody's trying to give me an IV, right? Trying to get an IV started on me. I'm a really hard stick.
Yeah.
Thankfully, an angel of an anesthesiologist came in and she was able to get it really quickly. And then at that point, they were like, asking me about my labors, how they typically are. And I was like, they're really usually pretty fast, once I get to this point. They're like, well, is your husband on your way? And I'm like in pain, right?
Yeah.
And so I give them my cell phone and they call Alex and they're like, where are you? And they're like, she's this far dilated. Like, we're going to actually have her deliver in the OR. Well, let's rewind back here a second. They hooked me up, we're monitoring James, and I was going to be a C-section. And so they called the doctors and they were like, hey, as long as James is tolerating it fine, he's not having any D cells with contractions, like, let's go ahead and just let her have a vaginal delivery. I was like,
Yeah.
yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like, yes, but it was like, oh no, like I have to mentally prepare now for this, which I've been planning mentally for a C-section, which I'd never had
Oh,
before. So talk about
yeah.
a quick change of plans. But
Yeah.
they were going to have me deliver in the OR in case like there was a medical emergency or if something went wrong with him. So they could put me under and do a stat C-section. But thankfully that didn't happen. So I got there at 11:30. And then by like 12:10, they were ready to roll because I was fully dilated. And they were going to roll me back to the OR. And I see Alex, he is running, like running to get to
Mm.
me. And they're like, here, dad, like throw on, the whole bunny suit as we're going into an operating room. And then everything just happened so quickly. And he was born at 12:21,
What time did you get there originally?
11:30 a.m.
Oh my God, less than an
Yes,
hour.
less than an hour. So it was really critical that I was obviously at the hospital for his
You
birth.
couldn't have cut it any closer.
No, I couldn't have really cut it any closer because everything just really worked out the way I think it was supposed to.
Wow.
And
Thank
then
God for those teams who are there, like, ready to handle that.
they
Like,
were, and
oh my
apparently the
gosh.
way that it works at Seton is when they have like this, when they have this type of they have like a bell apparently that they sound off. And like when after, he was born, like that was the one thing that I was worried about is that like he was going to be born and he wasn't going to cry and I was just going to start panicking at that point. But when he was born, he came out crying really hard. And so that was really reassuring to me. But after that point, they actually let me hold him for like 10 seconds, put him on my chest. Then they whisked him away. And then they started immediately working on him. And I got to see him like, 10 minutes later. He had, he was having a really hard time breathing, it turns out. And so he had one of those high flow nasal cannulas on, and they were going to take him up to the NICU. And Alex was like, the dad, like, do I go with my wife? Do I go with baby? And I was like,
Yeah.
no, please go with James. Cause
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't know what was going to happen. Unfortunately, he had several pneumos and he had about 9 or 10 of them to the point where they were like, we can't stick and we can't do another one. We can't, like, we've done a lot to try to help him. And so that was really hard. Of course, I'm in recovery, right? And I'm by myself. Well, I'm not by myself. I have a nurse and actually a social worker came to sit with me
Mm,
for
good.
like an hour and a half, 2 hours during all of this.
Wow.
And things were not good. And I don't feel like I understood how bad things were until days later, until Alex could share with me. And I feel bad for him because he had to really be in a really tough spot, like watching all of this happen. And they're like, let's take lots of pictures, like give us your phone so we can video him and you. And so they did get a lot of pictures and videos. And they had a really hard time. The first thing that they were going to do after they got his breathing okay is they were going to tap his bladder. And so they pulled out like a significant amount of urine. So that was helpful to him to stop, because what that was doing is his bladder was putting pressure on the rest of his organs and also was, I think, attributing to him having these pneumos. And so once
Mm.
that was resolved, things started to get a little bit better. And then Alex came to see me and he was stable and he was getting ready to be transported. And I'll never forget, because I was just like, mama bear, like looking, like waiting for someone to come walk by my room and come bring him so I could see him, because they were going to come bring him to me so I could see him before they took him by ambulance over to the children's hospital. And so I'll never forget the sound. It was the sound of cowboy boots. So if you're in Austin, I feel like a lot of the doctors and medical professionals wear cowboy boots. And I'm going to bring up another part later. So just remember this part.
Yeah.
And the nurse that walks in, he was like, "It is so nice to meet you guys. They actually just debriefed us on your case yesterday." And this is also
What?
an interesting part. The day before I had him, we actually met with one of the neonatologists. No, like having a pre-meeting of like what to expect, like how things were going to be, what they thought was going to happen. And so they literally the day before had just been debriefed on our family and our case. He was like, "I was actually supposed to be on the transport team," because he was supposed to be the first delivery there, right? So everybody kind of
Yeah.
knew about him already. And he made us feel like really reassured. He's like, "You're in great hands with me. We're going to take care of your baby." And then Alex followed them over to Dell and was with him basically until like, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And things were kind of going as we kind of expected. Like his kidney function numbers weren't good. He was in a really not a really bad position, if I'm being honest. And so then, of course, I don't have anything, right? I'm at the
Yeah.
hospital. I don't have anything, but I had nurses that came and sat with me and a patient care tech that came and sat with me. And of course, I'm calling everybody and giving updates. I'm kind of like it was like my first time of like having to do that, right? Little did I
What was
know.
what was the feeling like that you had? Was it like anxiousness, angst, like all of it?
I feel like I was in shock, to be
Mm.
honest, because everything
Yeah.
happened so quickly. And I was just so happy that he came out crying. Like that was the one thing that I focused
Mm.
on and I kind of held on to. And one thing that really helped me is they had these NICView cameras and I was able to like log in and go check on him
Oh,
like that
so
night
you
that they
could see
went over
him
there. I
at
could see
another
him.
hospital.
Mhm. And so that really helped me a lot. And just being able to like be excited because I hadn't been excited. I'd been really nervous that he was here and that he seemed to be doing okay. But little did I know he was not doing super great. I feel like Alex tried to shield me from some of that, trying to protect me and my emotions and my feelings. But he was also really honest with me too. And so he came back over, he ran home, got me some clothes. In the meantime, my kids were at daycare in the middle of the day. And so my sister in law, that was still here, she went and got them, picked them up. And so they spent the night with her. And then the next day, we calling to get updates. Alex ended up staying with me and he was like, "Please call us if anything happens. Like, I'll come back over there because it's only like a couple miles away." And so if he goes back over there right away in the morning, I am like chomping at the bit to get discharged, right?
Yeah, because 'cause you're like, "I had a vaginal birth, I'm fine, I can
Yeah. And I
go."
was like, "What time can I go?" And I was like, "This is my fourth delivery." And then I don't think I mentioned this either, but I also had gestational diabetes when I was pregnant with James. And so I was like really excited to like be able to eat different food and comfort food because it had been really hard the last couple of months and then not being able to like have a little dessert here and there.
I know.
That was hard for me, but it actually made me really healthy, to be honest. So it kind of was a positive thing. But, I
Yeah.
was worried that there was going to be extra lag time with the discharge because of that. But thankfully, they let me go at noon the next day.
Oh, wow.
So I got to
Okay, so
go
did you
over.
just, like, go straight over to Dell then?
We go straight over there. And then I got to see him, and I was really excited just to be able to hold my baby and to see him. He was on TPN for quite some time, but he actually surprised us all and he started taking little droplets of milk. It was really sad. He had to be extremely fluid restricted because he wasn't peeing enough. And so that kind of leads up to the next part is he got to the point where we were trying to wait as long as we could for dialysis because it's really tumultuous and dangerous for babies his size to go on peritoneal dialysis. And so that is the type of dialysis where it is done in the peritoneum and the abdomen. And so essentially fluid gets pushed in and then it gets pushed out. And they can do it manually or on a cycler, are the two different ways they can do that. And they were going to do it manually. And so push came to shove, he had to go on it or he was not going to make it. And so they put in a peritoneal dialysis catheter, I think, when he was 4 or 5 days old. And we were really worried because it started leaking around the exit site. That wasn't a good sign. And so at that point, They were like, we're going to do everything that we can, to keep him comfortable. We were having really difficult conversations at that point, on whether we wanted to have comfort care, if we wanted to continue to, fight for him, and some really just difficult conversations in general. We had one doctor that was really instrumental in all of this. And the day that he was born, there was emergency equipment ordered for him in case he had to go on hemodialysis, also known as CRRT, if you need to do it really, really slow on very critical and sick patients. And so if he were to go on that, he would need that type of hemodialysis, which is slow. And they actually had these special filters that were just emergency approved because of COVID just a couple months before, that are specifically built for pediatric patients, small patients. And so they ordered some of those the day that he was born, along with this really tiny hemodialysis catheter. So rewind back to the peritoneal dialysis catheter. It's leaking. We're having problems. On our wedding anniversary, which is like July 3rd, it's just a couple days after we got started with PD, we get a phone call saying that he's going to have to go back for emergency surgery. His bowel was perforated. So what happened was that the catheter got hit the bowel, and his bowel was leaking into his abdomen. And at this point, I mean, the prognosis is absolutely horrible. They're basically like, this is kind of it. You can bring your family, you bring your kids in. But we were like, we want to try everything we can, because at the end of the day, we want to say that we did everything we can to try to save his life. And so at that point, we brought our kids. They let us bring our kids in, and it's the middle of COVID, right? And so they were really strict on guests and visitors. And they were like, we're going to have them come up this back stairwell. We'll have them come in so they can come and meet him. And that's kind of when we knew things are really serious.
Yeah.
And we were planning on doing the hemodialysis surgery that next day. And they came to see him, and they were just so excited to meet their brother. They were so happy. Liliana, she's little at the time. She's like very
Yeah.
interested in giving him his passy. And, they're touching him. I will say my oldest, Jason was pretty nervous. And Vivian, she's kind of a carefree spirit. So she was just excited,
Yeah.
meet her little brother. And so the next morning that hemodialysis surgery was planned. And so we'd signed all the consents. We went home with the kids, of course, we're super nervous, emotional, on edge. We get there really early in the morning because the surgery is supposed to happen really early. He was still in the room. We were expecting to come up to an empty room. And one of the nurses walks in and was like, haven't they called you? And we were like, no. We're like, what's going on? And they were like, well, James actually peed a significant amount overnight, and his labs look okay, enough for us to not have to go forward with the surgery today. Well, we were just beyond shocked because we'd kind of given up everything at that point. I feel like people were standing in the gap for us. Our faith has been a big part of kind of our lives. And at that point, we were just like, I can't even believe anymore, because it was just so hard to get there, seeing him in the state that he was. And so a lot of people kind of stood in that gap for us. And with that, I think with the love of his siblings, I really feel like that's what made him pull through. And so he was able to not just go one day, but 3 weeks without having to get put onto hemodialysis.
Wow.
3 weeks.
I mean, there's no words.
No, the doctors were like, we see this happen sometimes, but we don't really have an explanation why. They were like, sometimes the kidneys just wake up for a little bit and then just decide to work for some reason. We don't really know why this happens, but it was a miracle. I mean, there's really
A true
nothing
miracle.
else to explain how that even happened. And so we went on 2 to 3 weeks. He was starting to take bottles, which that floored everybody. I mean, he was a little fight. I mean, even then he was a
It's
little
like
fighter.
giving you these signs of you're on the right track. Just keep trusting me. Like,
Yes.
like
And there
the
was
love of my siblings, all of these different things that you were doing.
And the one thing that I've kind of really stuck to is one of the neonatologists told us, he was like, you know what, we're just going to let James let us know what he needs, and we're just going to respond to him and his needs. And that's kind of really stuck with me throughout this journey, is just let let him tell us like what he needs and we'll go from there.
Mm-hmm.
And so then at that point, of course, this is also a big shift too, because we've been in the NICU now for 3-4 weeks and now we're having to go to the PICU, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's also a big
It's a different
change.
story.
Whole different story. The PICU is pretty much like our family at that point.
You would come to find out would be your home away from home.
We are home away from home, but he was on hemodialysis in the PICU for about 3 months. He had another PD cath placed, got to take him home, which that was really exciting, but really scary. Anybody who has
Yeah.
had a medically complex child knows that. And he did actually really great at home. We were doing the whole dialysis thing at home, which is a lot of, it was really nerve wracking at first, but lots of medications, lots of
Lots of not
appointments.
sleeping.
Lots of not sleeping. He did really great. He had a nephrectomy done to remove his kidneys because they were just causing more problems than they were helping at that point. And then a couple months later, unfortunately, he got a really bad infection and he had to go back on continuous hemo again in the
Yeah.
PICU for 3 months. And then rewind back to last year at the beginning of January, we started having some symptoms of a hernia. And unfortunately, the hernia led to, again, having to go on to hemodialysis. And so I kind of felt like through that situation, I learned to be an advocate. I had to really stick to my guns and really speak up about what I felt was going on. I learned a lot of things through that situation. And I had child life specialists come alongside both my husband and I and really talk to us about the situation, what we were going through, what our concerns were, and what we could advocate for. And there was a lot that we didn't know we could ask for. And so that's always one of the big things I think that's really important as a parent is just learning what you can and can't ask for and what you can advocate for. And that was really helpful to us. But that was a really hard situation too, because he did not do well on hemodialysis this time around. And in the meantime, we also got listed for transplant.
Yeah.
And so
Walk us through a
that
little bit more
school.
like the hemodialysis, like what was required for that to happen on a daily basis.
So there's peritoneal, the type that we do at home. So you have to have what's called a cycler. And there's a little program card that goes inside of it that has how many cycles they're going to be on, how long the cycles are going to be, how much fluid is going to go in and out. And so every day you have to like put what's called a cassette inside. It has to have a drain bag. And then you have to pick your prescription. And I feel like that was the hardest part for me is he just was so like unstable with all of that it would like be down to the wire on his blood pressure and kind of like how he looked, his weight,
Yeah.
kind of what prescription we were going to do. So that part really stressed me out. It was probably the most stressful part. I'm like, oh, I don't want
Because
to pick the wrong thing.
he's such a little guy. So fluid overload, you could literally see in him, or
Oh
not
yeah.
enough, you can see in him.
Oh, for
It's,
sure.
yeah.
You could physically see like his eyes sunken or, him being puffy. And so that part was really hard. You also had daily blood pressures twice a day. We'd still do those now, but we also had to weigh him twice a day. And then there's the vomiting. Like nobody tells you about, like they try to warn us about it, but got really bad. As the sicker or the longer he was on dialysis, he was throwing up like 4 to 5 times a day. And it was just absolutely heartbreaking to see him
Mm.
just be so physically sick because of kidney disease. So
Wow.
that part was really hard, just watching him be sick so much.
And with the hemo, that has to happen inpatient or in the
Yes, that
ICU, for
happens. Yeah,
example.
that happens
Okay.
inpatient. And so we did some of it inpatient, but mainly it was outpatient at a dialysis center. And there's lots of things that go on with that too, because really it's cleaning the blood. They're taking the blood out of the body, they're cleaning it through this filter, and then they're putting it back into the body. And they have to also set up something called a bath that's like different minerals and vitamins that go into the saline that is helping filter out the blood. There's like so much that goes into it. There's blood pressures every 15 minutes on that. It's just that hemo is just very scary on a young child.
He
And
ended up needing sedation during those hemo
Um,
sessions.
let's see here.
I'm
Actually,
I'm
no, a
trying to
lot.
remember. I
I'm
was
trying
trying
to
to
remember
remember. There
too.
was one, like, he
Yes.
would have to, what was that?
Yes. So that was when we were in the PICU the second time being on
Okay.
CKRT. And he would see the nurses come in and he would start panicking, even at like 14, 15 months because he knew
Yeah.
like that means he was going to get hooked up and he would just get really wild. And on those machines, like you can't move because if you move the wrong way, it can clot off the machine. And then like the biggest part is like getting the blood back, right? Because if you have blood loss, then you have to get, and then if it's significant, you have to get a transfusion. And that's really bad for dialysis patients because the more transfusions you get, the lower it makes your donor pool when it comes time for transplant.
All these things that you know and understand, Lyndsey, is just beyond me.
I felt like I had to become a nephrologist.
Yeah. You absolutely are a nephrologist and a child life specialist and a mom.
I will say real quick, I'm just happy to be doing this because when I first found out about this, like I wished I would have been able to find a podcast like this to hear somebody else's story. So I'm happy we're doing this because it's so needed.
I'm so happy we're doing it too. And like just hearing you process so many things. So let's close the loop on kind of, we'll talk about like pre-transplant and what are the big things you want parents to take away if they're doing dialysis at home or dialysis in an infusion center? Some of the things that help you as James's mom manage it all.
I think just taking things one day at a time. And if a day is too much, take it an hour or even a couple minutes at a time because it's just a lot mentally. Also, find your medical mom group, find your people because I have one medical mom, Jessica. Her son, Hank, has a very similar case as James, very similar everything. And so we message each other basically daily about things, but there's
Yeah.
like a bunch of us that we're just always in touch and we understand what each other's going through. And so finding people that really understand that was really important and very helpful to me. I didn't feel as alone.
Okay. Where did you end up finding her?
On a Parents of Kidney Kids Facebook group.
Okay. And that's where it all starts.
That's where it all starts is those groups. So
Finding your people.
yeah.
Well, we're going to pause now. And even though there's so much more to come in James's story with transplant and even the days up until transplant, and I remember you being like, can we try to get it earlier because this darn hernia. So there's a lot that leads
There's
up.
a lot.
But I'm so grateful that we got to hear this really first important part. And I don't know how we condensed it into this short amount of time for all that you went through, but
Yeah, there's a lot more, but I feel like we did a good job. I did a good job.
we hit the
of trying to-
highlights. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. I love you so much.
Love you too.
Thank you all so much for listening to Child Life on Call. If you head to our website, childlifeoncall.com, you're going to find all sorts of stuff there for parents, professionals, healthcare providers, child life specialists, no matter who you are. Actually, when you just go to our homepage, it'll help you direct to exactly where you need to go. On that, you'll find opportunities and PDUs for child life specialists. Parents, we've got a starter kit for you. And clinicians, we even have a clinician course, which teaches you how to be a confident and capable caregiver in pediatrics. We're so grateful that you're here. Please DM us on Instagram. And like I mentioned, when you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that. And I will see you again here next week.